If you watched my first video of this series, you already know how my first day started. That morning, after setting up my computer, I was promptly introduced to the very first product that I would witness in development at InterHive. But to be totally honest, I hadn't even seen our core products that were already in market. But in that demo, I realized really quickly what my first duties were going to be. And wow, they were really big for my very first day in product marketing as a whole at a brand new company. First, I needed to build out and stand up a beta program where I could generate feedback from early access customers. And then I needed to figure out how to launch this bad boy in the market, but that's a topic for another day. But lucky for me, I legitimately adore being thrown in a fire. And I'm being completely honest, I find it's the best way for me to learn personally. Otherwise, I likely would have thrown on my fancy blazer, put it back on, and then made a swift exit after that. But instead, I whipped out my brand new notebook that I purchased just for this occasion. But then I noticed that no one at an up-and-coming SaaS company used paper-based notebooks, so I put it back into that laptop bag that I bought, and I proceeded to brainstorm what an MVP, super scrappy beta program could look like. But how do you start a beta program? They can get really formal. They can be very complex. They can be qualitative. They can be quantitative. They can be both. They can be neither. My game plan was to identify customers that would be a good fit for this program and the product, and then lure them with free product if they agreed to touch base with me ever so often. But this touch base included biweekly calls, emails exchanged, surveys, and a little sprinkle of homework. Ideally, after this beta program, product management would know exactly what areas of the product needed to work. And I would have the market problems, I'd have a lay of the competitive land or alternatives, I would have key messages and positioning, some use cases, personas, and I would have exactly what I needed to develop a rock solid go-to-market from there. Because it was my very first beta program, I learned a ton of lessons, and I still am. I'll attempt to do this in a chronological order, so stay with me here. So the first lesson, defining our objectives, it really seemed like the most obvious place to start. And this is a lot easier to do if you work directly with the product manager. They're going to get a ton out of this program as well. My product marketing bias goals came down to these buckets for this very first program. Is this product ready for release, or does it need more work? And if so, what work? Who are the users of this product? What are their current workarounds? Are there alternatives? What are their pain points that it's aiming to solve? How well does it do at solving those pain points? What is the business value? And are there any tangible results or transformation customer stories that I could leverage in our launch process? Once you're set on goals, you need to then define the timeline of the program with start and end dates and a schedule of key milestones. This helps keep everyone organized. Also think about the process for how you would go about making an extension for specific customers if circumstances warranted. Then you need to know what documentation, training, and assets that you need to build to be successful. And make sure that you understand how it'll be installed or enabled, how customers will be trained, and how they'll be supported from a technical standpoint. Something fairly important is identifying who actually is an ideal fit, and then potentially listing out some selection criteria. And at that point, I really didn't know who our customers were. I didn't know them well at all. So I relied on customer success and sales to help me recruit specific customers. So here are some of the considerations that I provided my team when looking for that ICP. Make sure that they're compatible, first off. Constructive feedback. You need somebody that's really willing and able to give constructive feedback, not just naysayers. It takes a very specific personality for that. Make sure that they are willing and able to carve out time to spend in the product, and they're willing to spend time with me every 2 weeks on top of that. Yes, it's time that we're asking them to devote to us, but at the end of the day, they're really helping build and mold that raw innovation. And it's a super exciting endeavor that many customers will be happy to help out with if they have that capacity. So ensure that that is part of your messaging when you initially ask. So once you've worked with sales and customer success on identifying the candidates, and once they've agreed to participate, make sure that you get up to speed with the account in advance of meeting the customer, especially if this is your first time. You want to instill confidence in these conversations. Set expectations up front. Customers should know that framework or timeline of that program, what's needed or being asked of them, what types of things that they'll be helping solve. In our case, I prepared a bit of an information packet to help lay this out. Another tip is encourage customers to raise product bugs directly with support. So make sure that you're keeping in control of this conversation every time you touch base. Otherwise, it may lead back to those potential cases that are actively open instead of your new product validation. Then you need to build your interview guides. Excuse me. So do a pre-beta questionnaire. At least it worked for me. This will give you a benchmark to compare at the end of the program against. Make sure that you incorporate open-ended questions that are vague, like, what didn't I ask you that I should have? There's a lot of gold that comes from these questions. Ask them to complete a couple of workflows, base them on some of those common use cases that you believe or expect. And if they can share their screen or record that session, even better. Product design will love you, by the way. This is an easy way to build relationships with them. Active listening is critical. You got to find the problems, not necessarily take the solutions that they come up with or those feature requests just at face level. Always ask why, even one more time, even if it feels awkward. If you can get to that third level of unpacking that specific problem, that's when you can really make a lot of traction. Be prepared to be asked about the roadmap. It's going to happen. But one lesson here is never overpromise. It only leads to ruining that credibility that you've worked so hard to build. Your product will hopefully solve a pile of problems, but you just can't solve them all. So you can remember that, and that's okay. And the information collected from these calls should be sliced and diced and presented in a multitude of ways so that it can be efficiently utilized by whoever is looking at it. So we kept ours in Google Docs, but I'm sure that there's much better places to house this information. But some ways that we've categorized in the past are call notes by customer, feature requests, notes by area of functionality, customer status, and high-level findings. Always good to have a summary on hand in case the CEO calls you. Always do a post-mortem internally to understand what worked, what didn't, and then you can optimize all of your future betas. And last, but certainly not least, disseminate your findings because everybody across the organization will find this information valuable. Sometimes I like to take customer snippets of recordings, throw them into an MP4, because it really helps formulate your voice of the customer and supplement that pitch in a sales cycle by tenfold. This particular product called Cleanse, my baby, that I started with on my first day at IntraHive is still one of my favorites. When you can get that close to customers that you can express and represent their needs, that is every product marketer's dream. And that's the potential of a beta program, scrappy or not.